This by the family. Yes, all the people are being maspid to Mimkatza, because they have to leave here by 3 o'clock. All gathering now to give Kol Achron, Rudolph Tessler, Ben Shlomo, big loss, the Klal Yisrael, our community, personal loss, close to Yedidim, close to 40 years. Rudolph Tessler lived a full life. He did not live a life only for himself. He cared very much about the Klal. He understood the priorities of a Fumi Yid, how a Yid has to live, and has to hold on to that strong Messiah that he got from his parents and grandparents. He served the Rebbeinu Shalom with the best of his abilities. We all know he's a Holocaust survivor. As a teenager, he went through the Milchama. Baruch Hashem, he survived, but he survived as an Erlich Yid. For many years, Tim Pesach and Shavuos, he used to make a Kiddush. And at that time, he used to mahana us with what life was in Europe, what life was in the concentration camp, how Yidden lived in the shtetl, how Yidden survived with all the anti-Semitism against them. He gave a glimpse of the Alter Heim, the way the life was until the Milchama, and how he survived in the camps during the Milchama. He went through a lot, but Baruch Hashem, he always was thankful to Rebbeinu Shalom. And what the Rebbeinu Shalom helped him to survive and to build again a family here in America. There's a lot to say about Rudolph Tessler. We as a community are very thankful for what he did for our community. He was very involved in Chol Dor Shebekdusha. He was involved in building Torah in our community very much. Be it the day schools, the high schools, the yeshivas, the mikvahs. He had a hand in everything. Chol Dor Shebekdusha. But not only in Chicago, in Eretz Yisrael, Moses Vishnes, Moses Kleisenberg, and many other Meisters. When he had the hospital, Baruch Hashem, he accomplished a lot in his life. We saw in Rudolph Tessler a link to the past generations. We saw what an Erlich Yid has to live. For him, Tchil B'Tziba, he never missed a Tchil B'Tziba. Whenever he can make it, he down with a minyan. Kvi sitem a Torah. Learned Daf Yomi when he could. When he came into the Beis Medrash, before davening, he didn't shmuz. He opened the Chumash, like the Rechaim HaKadosh. He lived a life that we're all proud of. Rav Tessler was Zeicha, the wonderful children, 2 sons and a daughter, the Baruch Hashem are going, V'derech HaTorah, V'derech HaYirah. He was Zeicha, the Einiklach and Einiklach. He was very proud of them. How they're all growing up to be Eilicha Kinder. Continuing the Messiah that he was so proud of. We've told his children, Baruch Hashem, we're kind of mitzvah, keep it up aim to the highest degree. Especially last while he wasn't well. They were constantly, children, Einiklach, coming in and out of the house the whole time. Rav Toli will be very missed by us. But we have to learn from Rav Toli. We have to know what our priorities in life are. He taught us all that we have to keep the golden Messiah that we have from past generations and continue that. B'derech Avosseinu HaKadoshim. Because this is our tachlis in life. There's a lot more to say about Rav Toli, but since we all have to be katsa because I have to catch a flight, the bunch of help should come a time. Bilmos Netzach, Mocha Shadimu Al Koponim.
Uvad Chusid min Uretz zum verloren nicht nur der Tessler Mishpuch hat jetzt verloren a Tate, a Seide, eine alte Seide. Jeder eine du, ganz Chicago, Berkel, hat verloren in seine Seide. Uvad Chusid min Uretz. Ich habe gerade das hier zu gehen für eine längere Zeit, gemacht jede Shabbos uns mit unseren Kindern zu gehen besuchen, Rabbi Naftule. It was one of the highlights of the week to be able to verbringen, to sing Vishnitz and Neginim zusammen and feel like we're transformed 80, 90, 100 years back. The Naftuluk was the last person to remember the Altazai, the Abbas Yisrael from Vishnitz. In the Weg wie Pfleges Masbezan mit dieser Frischkeit hat gehabt eine neue dicke Sekunden, hat gekannt der Mann in Sachen von 90 Uhr zurück. In der Pflege mit geseidete Zeilen, da Schuche, als meine Mama seide, dass der Chaleruf hat ihm verheert auf der Gemüde, wenn gewähnt ein Kleinkind. Und hat gut gekannt, die Gemüde, ist der ältere Seide, hat ihm gegeben, dem hat 6 Lei, 6 Romanian pennies, because hat so gut gekannt, die Gemüde als Kind. Und du 90 Jahre später, 80, 90, knapp 100 Jahre später, soll das können übergeben mit derselbe Warmkeit nicht nur übergeben, noch für die Kinder, für die Einiglich, soll haben der Abbas Teure, der Gefühl, was ist Kusche in der Welt, das ist eine neue dicke Aufti. In der Kille hat aufgekickt zu dem Naftule, die Seide. Letzte Rische Schune, einmal zu dem Gekäuf, sei Ataya Aliyah, als sie gekommen zu mir noch dem, hat Masbe gewesen, gesucht, aus der Wissen, ich fühle zu Asas hier zu kennen, da haben in derselbe Besmeidisch wie der Naftule. Ich habe gefühlt, ich muss ihn kaufen der Aliyah. Und nicht nur jeder einer hat aufgekickt zu der Digme. Wir halten jetzt bei der Parshas von Mitzrayim, noch dem Yetzias Mitzrayim, noch dem Mamid Har Sinai. Das sind die ersten zwei von der Sheish Schiris. Das ist gewesen, Naftules Leben. Gewesen in Mitzrayim, sein größer Nissen, der Eibestad ihm geraten wird, und hat gerade Mamid Har Sinai feiert dem und noch dem. Und das hat solche überzugeben, zu sagen, Teire, Chushe, wie Mischpuche. Man sieht, hat mir geriefen Hand, aus Mensch, wenn er geht, der Psyrat, mir verzahlt hat, die gedenkst, in seinem Gewehen bei dem Naftul Aimu, hat geschmiss wegen dem Mochumejuren, hat ihn gefragt, wie so ist die gekannt, wie so ist die sich geraten wird. Und der Naftul hat gemacht mit der Hand, also, hat uns geraten wird. Und mit dem hat gelebt, et Maki gewesen, als einzige gekommen von der Eibischte. Ich habe gebeten, 2-3 Jahre zurück, aber ich kann nicht bitte zeilen, ein paar Schale Schiedes der Masse, mit der Weiz von Peisach, wie hat Mäuse Nefisch gewesen, sie können essen, Matze zu Peisach. Ich habe gefühlt, es ist so wichtig, als Menschen, jeder soll es kennenlernen von den Makardischen. Und haben das hier, dass sie können hören und mitleben, wusste sie gewähnen amulige Zeiten, amulige Jiden, wusste es meinten sie ist Nefisch von Mitzvahs. Und es heimsand, wenn es, ob man gekannt, reden von Schuhes auf Schuhes. Und ich weiß, dass die Zeit ist eng. Tate so sagen gesinnt, haben gesagt, dass der neue Melech in Parshas Neuach bringt rup, als jede dort sei eine Mitzvah. Der neue Melech sagt dort, dass jene dort hat eine Mitzvah von Tzitzis, Land dort. Er gefragt, wie ist weiß man, wusste der Mitzvah von der dort? What's our unique Mitzvah for this generation? But the Gamfit, you have to look around at the unique Mitzvahs, what we have today, what we didn't have 50, 100 years ago. And that unique Metzias is that many of us as Oichet have parents who have Arichas Yomim. And our mitzvah for this door is, how are we going to treat those parents? There are many different options today. There's retirement homes, there's nursing homes, there's other places. But are we going to do our best to make those last years of our parents as comfortable as possible? And ich kann sagen firsthand, all of us saw David and Mordechai rose together with their Chushiva wives, and Kinder and Einiglich rose to that challenge, to that schis. Everyone taking their shifts, who's going to be with the Tatim, at the Zaida, by davening, who's going to stay home for Yom Tiv. It was something very inspiring and uplifting to see. And not only did they do it, but everyone did it with such a Freilichkeit, feeling that it's such a schis, to be able to do that Kibbud Av. Eibishter soll helfen, also im Naftule soll huben alechtige Ganeiden, dass die jetzt darauf gehen. I remember the tremendous simcha he had a few months ago when he was sandik. ein ihr Einekol, for the first time he was able to have an Einekol named after Shmuel Chaim Rosenfeld. Sein Seide was from the Babis division of Tzachsidim. There was such a simcha in his face, as it Zeuchi gewesen, an Numen zu geben, noch der Seide. You're going up to Shemaim now, you're going to meet all these Eides, all the Rebbes you were close to, the Abbas Yisrael, the Vishaviruv. Your Mishpucha that was Avek al Kiddush Hashem, and they'll greet you and say, that Naftule, da Zeuchi gewesen, was da weggestellt, Doris Yishulim and Beruchim, you were able to Zeuchi to stelle back Teure, here in Chicago, in Bnei Brak, Iberal, Nemetz Hashem, Mizal Zeuchi Zan, Zabil Amuvis Lanetzach, Amucha Hashem, Dimam Al Kopunim.
Rishus, Moronon, V'Raboisai. It's hard to encapsulate the life of this unique individual, Naftali Zechron Livrocha. It was larger than life. Lived for close to a century. He saw Klal Yisrael B'Tifarta before the Churban. He lived through the Churban. And after the Churban, with great determination, was a leader in our times in building Torah, Moistus, HaTorah V'Hayira, Moistus Chassidus. He had a large chelik in building our community, as we heard here in Chicago, and communities throughout the world in Europe and in Eretz HaKodesh. I want to share b'kitzur who Mr. Tessler, Zechron Livrocha, was to me, and I'm sure others feel the same. In the Melechus HaMishkan, there's a malacha called Soisel Menas Livnois B'Mkoimoi. Although the Mishkan, the binyan was never B'Mkoimoi, rather at the next Masa. The Gemara says because Al Pi Hashem Yachanu V'Al Pi Hashem Yisa'u made it into Al Menas Livnois B'Mkoimoi. The Gedolim explain that in Moshel, the baby's traveling on his mother's lap from point A to point B. When he's leaving point A, he asks the baby, "Where are you?" "I'm on my mother's lap." And when you arrive at point B, "Where are you?" "I'm on my mother's lap." Klal Yisrael, regardless of geographic location, their Iker Mokum was B'Yad Hashem, and that's called the Menas Livnois B'Mkoimoi. Mr. Tessler of Naftali Zechron Livrocha lived his life with one constant: Al Pi Hashem Yachanu V'Al Pi Hashem Yisa'u. It didn't make a difference if it was in the Heim in Europe, or if it was struggling in the Lager, or in America in those times, as a tailor or as a successful businessman. Always leading him was Al Pi Hashem Yachanu Al Pi Hashem Yisa'u. What does Hashem want from me? What does my Masorah tell me to do? Lishinu es l'shoinam, to him, was not just the actual language that he spoke, but the Yiddish sprach, what he said, how he said it. I would call him an Erev Shabbos, and no matter what time it was, even in the morning, was machtir, a great Sub Shabbos, and he wasn't putting up the chant. He was never Mishana from his Mishpochas Masorah, from his Rebbeim's guidance. And this is how he succeeded in bringing the ideals, the Ashkofa of the Heim to America and to Eretz Yisrael. Both in the Moistus HaTorah that he built and in the Choshev Mishpocha of B'nai Torah Yereim Mushleimin that he leaves behind to carry on his legacy. My personal perspective of this Gersa Nifter was his loyal yedidus with my mishpacha dating back to Ridgeway Street. His kurva to my father, Zechron Livrocha. I can't forget, 25 years ago when my father's Oren arrived at his Levaya in Yeshiva's Torah Or in Eretz Yisrael, and Naftali was there. and he fell over the urn with bitter tears of emotion. He always asked us, "What's macht the mama?" He cared and he carried us. And when Naftali Zechron Levracha had a great chilek in assuring that tells you yeshiva should exist and flourish in Chicago. As the Yodei Dover know, this was not necessarily popular at that time. Now that the Zayda sitzt nicht by the Tisch, as we bagleit the grace of Nifter, Lebeis Leilamai, we must keep in front of us the Demus Duknai, the image of this prince, who together with his queen, his Eshes Chayil, stellt avek a mishpocha miyucheses b'Yisrael. He held on to the Messiah with tenacity, and was Mekadosh in Shemayim in everything that he did. He should be a Melitzer for his Choshev and Mishpacha, his Kehila, our Kehila, for Klal Yisrael, so that's when they need a Yeshua, Bila Mavas Lanetzach, Mach Hashem Elokim Dima Me'al Kulpan.
To be properly maspid my father, Mishkovalai, would take much longer than the time allotted me today. It would be an impossible task. He managed to fill his life with so many accomplishments, it would take anyone hours to fully enumerate them. The Mishnah Nova says, Amar Hill, Ashleisha Devarim La'elam Aimed, Al Taira, Al Abayda, Al Gamilas Chasadim. My father is going to the Oil Na'amis, having accomplished the dictates of Philip to the fullest. Al Taira. My father, as most here know, never got the chance that most boys or young men get nowadays. That's to learn in the yeshiva for a few or several years after Mesivta. The war interrupted his learning, and the only smicha he ever got. The only smicha he ever got was from Auschwitz and Dachau. I would venture that his life after the smicha illustrated that this was the highest level of smicha that anyone could get. My father always enjoyed learning and attended shiurim whenever he could, here in Miami and Yerushalayim. He especially enjoyed learning most recently with his great-grandsons, Yosef and Yehuda Kaplan. It gave him great pleasure to learn with Mishnayos with them, whether it was here in Chicago or on the phone from Miami. In his 80s, he was likely to make a siyum on Shas, finally being able to catch up on some of the learning that denied him earlier. He particularly enjoyed the Daf Yomi shir given by Reuben Levinson and often calling into the shir when he was out of town. I believe his building of the Vizhnitz Yeshiva building that contains the Beis Medrash, mikveh, dorm rooms, etc., qualifies here as well, as there have been millions of hours of learning there in the more than 30 years since he built it. And build it he did. He dealt with the architect on the design and made numerous trips to Bnei Brak during construction to supervise the construction. Al Avoida. Tefillah B'tzibur and Yom Tovim were a large part of his life as well. For over 30 years, he was zeichet to spend Yom Yerayim and visions with his Rebbe, really immersed in the essence of the Yontif. It gave him great pleasure to be able to hear and sing many of the nigunim of his youth, spending time with the Rebbe, going to Tishim, and feeling the Yontif and Bnei Brak gave him great chizuk for the rest of the year. My father also had great covet for Rabbanim. I remember going with him to the Klezenberger Rav, the Lelever Rebbe, the Ger Rebbe, Rav Steinman, and other Gedolim and Rebbes. Often after speaking with the Rebbes would turn and ask him for a bracha as well. Al Gemilas Chasadim. My father, along with my mother, Alasham, enjoyed doing chesed for others. They each had their own community projects that they did individually, as well as those they worked on together. They supported each other to the nth degree. My father goes to Shemayim carrying not packages or carloads, but shipload after shipload after shipload of mitzvahs for all the tzedakah he gave. From individuals to Meistus, his hand was open. You see, the best description of my father was that he was a builder. not only of our family, but of yeshivas, day schools, girls' high schools, nursing schools, bati midrashim, dormitories, and on and on. Many of the schools here in Chicago have been the beneficiaries of his efforts, not only financially, but in their founding, construction, and expansion. The Chicago today was not the Chicago he found when he got here in the 1950s. Quite far from it. For example, there were many who opposed a separate girls' high school, many in positions of leadership. He didn't care. He knew what was right, and he pushed on regardless. The same with other moistas. He was determined to do what he felt was right. More than anything, my father was a man of action, never letting the accomplishments of yesterday slow down what needed to be done today. He's always asked me when he saw me at the end of the day, "Nu, what did you accomplish today?" I always didn't have an answer for that, but he always did. In many ways, my father's life paralleled that of our nation. He came from humble beginnings. He grew up in a small but tight-knit community. His family grew to 11, a large tribe, only to be exiled from their homes, decimated by murder and slavery, surviving only through siyata d'shmaya, multiple miracles, and tremendous hard work. Then a rebirth and a flourishing. The story of our people. My father was born at a time that appeared outwardly closer to how things looked 1,000 years ago than how they look today. No electricity, indoor plumbing, gas stoves, or telephones. A time before email and internet and instant communication. Yet, I dare say he lived in a time that's more authentic than the time we live in. He grew up in a one-room, log cabin type home, where the best place to sleep in the winter was on the floor next to the wood stove. Who was around now to give testimony of that world? Who was around now to talk about the ghetto, the cattle cars, selections, Auschwitz, beatings, lice, death marches, Dachau, and liberation? The chaos of the post-war years, where many decided that to be frum, or even Jewish, only brought suffering that they no longer wanted any part of. Yet his bitachon never wavered. He had questions of why, many questions. But the lack of an answer to that enormous question didn't cause his emunah to waver one iota. My father was more than just the builder of our family. To many, he was an example of what a frum yid could accomplish. He came to America with nothing but a suitcase of clothing, yet he built tall buildings, yeshiva buildings, knew congressmen, mayors, governors, prime ministers. But he knew what was really important. To him, it was his family and his community. I remember once walking into his office, overhearing him negotiating the formation of an Israeli government. He knew people in the Likud, he knew people in the Labor Party, he knew people in the Aguda. And he was the bridge that they used to negotiate the government. When I asked him why he was doing it, he said, because we need things, we need jobs for our community, we need ministers. He was negotiating for different deputy ministerships for the Aguda. He and my mother hosted an annual Shabbos Cholamayit Sukkos Kiddush in Yerushalayim that for many years was an institution. Chief rabbis, ministers, Chavrei Knesset, and business leaders from all around the world attending. It was a combination of his two great loves, Eretz Yisrael and my mother. The homes he built in Yerushalayim were something he dreamt about and worked hard to acquire. He took great pride in being zeicha to own something there. My mother loved nothing more than to spend time there with him, building his homes, hosting guests, and taking walks with him through Yerushalayim. And my mother. But for the war, it was a marriage that never would have happened. She came from a wealthy, aristocratic home, Chassan Sofer Einikel. She had cooks, a laundress, even a Goyish nanny that said Kriya Shema with them at night. Not exactly the same background that my father came from. If someone would have mentioned to my mother's father, that he had a shidduch for his daughter, a Marmarsh boy from Bisho, my grandfather would have been highly insulted. Yet when they didn't meet in New York 5 years after the war, they created a shining example of what a marriage should be for all of us. While she doted on him, she was not afraid to express her opinion, and she was the only one that could overrule him, often letting him think that it was her idea after all. He took great pride in introducing her as his wife, taking her on overseas trips and spending time with her. This is the end of that great story as well. He never stopped loving her. He often told us how special she was. And his children and grandchildren. We knew how much he missed her these past 15 years. Well, now it's time for our family to grieve our tremendous loss. We're comforted in knowing that they are together again, none of madness. We're also comforted knowing that he'll be a Melech Yosher for all of us, as being the patriarch and protector of our family was the essence of who he was. He will be the best Melech Yosher for Achenu Kobeis Yisrael during these times, especially for Chayalim, especially for the hostages. He was a hostage for over a year. Karasatay was also very important to him. On behalf of the family, I want to express our Karasatay to Dr. Greenblatt, who was a Malach and Tutit. Took care of him, cared for him like his own father, particularly these last several months that were difficult. And I also want to give thanks to everybody in the community who asked about him. Whenever I was around and he wasn't around, I would always get the question, how's your father? Rabbi Levin, who called him so often to wish him a good Shabbos. Rabbi Shmuley Schmelzer and Rabbi Brownstein, who called him every Erev Shabbos. Rabbi First, who visited him and called him. Rabbi Achenstein, who came over so frequently, often with his children, to visit and to bring something as Rebbetzin made the Kodesh Shabbos and to sing Vizhas Negunim. It meant a lot to him, and it meant a lot to us. I also want to thank Jeannie and Beth, who not just cared for my father, but cared about my father. They're two angels that we're privileged to know. We have our thanks and gratitude for all you did for our father. We can't thank you enough. Daddy, on behalf of myself and my family, children, the grandchildren, great-grandchildren, I want to ask Mechila for all the things that I know that I did and those that I didn't do for you. We'll miss you every day, and your name will be on our lips constantly. In your honor, I'll try to have a Shiluvitz in New York Saint. It was an undeserved honor having you as my father. Give Mommy a kiss from us. And the only situation for the family, and for all of us here in Chicago, and all the communities that you live in.
My father would say that there was 3 tekufas in his life. The tekufa before the war, during the war, and tekufa after the war. I'd like to focus on the tekufa after the war, as we can't do all of it in such a great life. After the war, it was a time of choice. Before the war and during the war, it wasn't a time of choice. He was born into a certain family and he was taken by force. After the war was a time of bilbul, the most difficult time a yid faces. It was bilbul, it was chaos, there was no rabbanim, there was no yeshivas, there was literally nothing. There was no tefillin, there was no tzitzis. He made a choice that many didn't make. He decided he was going to follow the Messiah's of us, which was not popular, as my brother said. This was the life then. When he finally made it to America after wandering Europe to and fro for 2 years, people don't realize that when the war ended, things didn't get good overnight. It took years. He came to America and he ended up by a cousin whose father had come to America 50 years previously. He came to this cousin who was a very, very successful attorney who took him in and said, you live with me and I'll put you through college, which at that time was the guaranteed parnasa. You can eat kosher, you can go to shul, but Shabbos is not a thing. You have to work Shabbos. He picked himself up immediately from this very comfortable existence and went back to the east side with literally just the clothes on his back. He had nothing else. But that's what he chose. After working many different jobs in New York, from waiter, smuggler. They can't get him anymore. I could say it out loud, smuggler. You know, and it finally ended, farmer, they had a farm. He ended up in Chicago. He moved to Chicago to be with family because there was a parnas here. There was a job here. He worked very, very, very hard. He struggled for very, very many years with my mother, from one job to another, trying to make a parnasa. He always said how fortunate he was to live in Chicago, how special the city was, and when the rest of the family actually moved back to New York, he did not. My father chose to stay in Chicago because he loved the city, he loved the people, and he would say that constantly to us. But the Chicago then in the 50s was not the Chicago of today. You look out at a sea of Bnei Torah, and that wasn't what Chicago was then. As a matter of fact, when Tel Yeshiva came to Chicago, it was with very, very few supporters. There was a handful. My father was then a young man, newly in town, barely making a parnasa, and yet somehow he decided that he was going to be an Ivri like Avram Avinu. On the other side, what was the other side? It tells the Rosh Yeshivas, young men themselves, with a few in a car, a couple cars, and that was the beginning. He stayed with them in a relationship that lasted decades upon decades. I remember many times my father would say, Schmelzer called, take care of this, take care of this, do this, buy this, take care of that. It was never without hesitation. It was always without hesitation. He remained close for all the years the Weitzner Rebbe was in town. Too short of a life he lived, the Weitzner Rebbe, Zachor Tzaddik L'Bracha. And he stayed with him, because that was the Mesorah's Avos. My father did not deviate from minhag. Anyone who's in this shul who did not say, start with Karbanos before Mincha would tell you, when did we become an Ashkenaz shul? He stayed with minhag. He did not deviate from minhag. And correspondingly, when you don't deviate from minhag, you don't deviate from anything else either. Now, when we were younger, he sent us to go to camp in New York, which was very expensive to do. We didn't fly. We got in the car somehow. We got a ride with somebody for us. I knew nobody else in the camp. But because there wasn't an appropriate separate camp in Chicago, he sent us there. He sent us to Pirchei. Pirchei had 50 boys then. It was a different Chicago. And yet he persisted in staying with what he wanted and what he wanted to instill in us. When they needed a girls' school, I remember the meetings in our house with the Rosh Yeshivas, a very small group of people, and he was fond of saying that somebody used to tell him, when hair will grow on my palm is when there will be a separate girls' school in the city. You had to be an Ivri on the other side. It tells you Rosh Yeshiva, the Weitzner Rav, with a few people who wanted that education. It wasn't a question of should we open another yeshiva for this kind of boy or that kind of boy. It was let's have a yeshiva to begin with. And my parents struggled for many years making a living. And I remember he had great Akarsatoi to Yaina Singer, who maybe some people remember was a shaykhid in town, a wonderful, wonderful person. And we used to go every Purim. We'd come with a silver tray of shalach manos my mother would make for them. It was a big deal. And I always wondered what was the great taiva he did. My father never told years and years later what was it, that when my father did a job, Yaina Singer was willing to hire him to deliver chickens on Sundays and after his other job. And this helped him get by. And that was what it was like in those years. Eventually, Baruch Hashem, my father had a lot of siyata d'shmaya, which he recognized clearly as siyata d'shmaya, and he became successful. And as he became successful, with that success became the desire to build, the desire to take that success that he had and essentially started to give it away. My father was a fundraiser's dream and a nightmare at the same time. He walked into Vishnitz and said, I'd like to do something for you, what do you need? They said, we need to build a yeshiva. So he built a yeshiva. That was it. It was a long conversation. My brother said they came to the house, the plans. He was very, very involved with it. And he built what was at the time the nicest yeshiva really in the world. But at the same time, he was a cheshbon. Everything that was a cheshbon. He didn't just give because someone said give. You had to be the real thing. He was close to the Klosenberger Rebbe in the war. He was with him in Warsaw Ghetto, and he actually did his work for him. Because the Klosenberger Rebbe couldn't do it, and that saved the Rebbe's life. And my father did it knowing that might kill him, literally, from doing someone else's work. and he stayed close to him for decades. And when he built the hospital, my father recognized that when they had the hospital, which he helped them build, if you don't have a nursing school, how are you going to keep a hospital that's going to go the way the Rebbe wants? So they built a nursing school. And they had to be not just a nursing school, but the best nursing school. At Taka, it is today the best nursing school in Eretz Yisrael. But with a cheshbon of building, not just today and now, but what's going to be for tomorrow and the next day. And the yeshiva in Viznitz, if you go to the bottom of it, what was his cheshbon, to a certain extent? It's a matzeva. This was his monument to what he lost. The names of all his family, my mother's family. That this is what a Jew does. It's not a tall tower somewhere. It is Torah and Chesed. There's many things that he would do many years ago. My father lived playing her a long life. You're talking the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and 90s. When the Russians came out in the 70s, he bought tefillin for every single Russian boy. But he had to be willing to learn. Rabbi Hollander, learn with every boy. You're willing to learn and know Hilchos tefillin and agree not to just put it on once and throw it out. He went to Yad Vashem and understood that Yad Vashem was not a proper place for frum people. They didn't go. So what did he do? He saw that people weren't learning about what the frum did in the war. So he instituted a program there to teach people, what the frum, at get great odds. He put almost 10 years to get this done. And there now are thousands of Charedim that go into Yad Vashem and see what impact the war had on the frum, and that the frum truly were the heroes of the war, what they stuck to. The director of Yad Vashem told me that he had seen many institutions change donors. He had never seen a donor change an institution. Last time my father was in Eretz Yisrael, a few years ago, he was already weaker. He couldn't walk well. We had to get some medical equipment. So I called Yad Sarah, which donates medical equipment. You can borrow medical equipment from. And I told the woman, I need this, and what's the name of the person, this and this. And she tells me, is his wife's name Chayesara Tessler? Yeah, why do you ask? Because I'm looking at the plaque on the wall. I work in the building that they gave for Yad Sarah. And we never knew any of this. My father never told. We always found this out from other people that he did. He never told us these things. Many times he would chasanas that they made constantly. He used to want particularly for orphans. My parents had a particular, because of their situation, for orphans. He would make, every time a child or uncle would get married, they'd make 1 or 2 chasanas for orphans. One time he wanted to make sure it was truly orphan and that they were people who needed. And so send me an invitation. He wanted to make sure that it happened. One time he gets an invitation from Rabbi Grossman, and he sees that the person has a father. So he calls him. I thought you wanted to, we agreed that it would be a Yisayim only. He said he had everything you wanted. He was poor, he was a Talmid Chacham, he needed help. I should hold it against him that he had a father. So my father said, he always went along if it was real. He was willing to give credit many times, and I found this out from other people. People who were uncomfortable taking money, he would go to someone, I know he'll take from you, give him the money and say it's from you. And this was the way he went. He understood where things came from and what to do. My father had no airs about him. He carried his own luggage. He was this temperament, was the same, whether things were very good or not so good. You couldn't tell the difference really, whether he had a successful business or things didn't go well. But he always had a cheshbon. He would go into maistas and he would, without them knowing he was there, and spend time there to see what was going on when there weren't expectations of a visit. My father also did not care about what kind of hat a person wore, what yarmulke he wore, how long his beard was. If you were the genuine thing, if you were a real person, he loved you and he helped you as he could. Now, I also think there was a fourth tekufa in my father's life, which he never spoke about, and that was the tekufa after my mother passed away. My mother, who meant everything to him, and again, he truly understood and said it again, he never could have had the shidduch before the war. And he was proud of that. And he showed us, despite the difficulty, and it was hard on him, he showed us with dignity. He never complained. He never said anything negative. And I don't believe I've heard in my father's life any one time that he ever complained. I think, the most amazing thing perhaps my father did was that he raised a family, a regular family. My father came home for dinner every night. My father didn't work Sundays. He'd take us play Sundays, and he'd take us after we did the gardening. My father used to do the gardening with a hand mower and a hand hedger. And I remember when my mother bought him an electric hedger for Hanukkah once. It was a big simcha. And he did that, and we grew up in a home. The home that he bought in 1967, because it was the day of the snowstorm, and he showed up and no other bidder came. That was the house he remained in. In Eretz Yisrael, when he built something beautiful, it was in Eretz Yisrael. My father had great patience for people's so-called bad midos. People would do things, sometimes people would do things for him and they were not nice, and I'd see him talking to them, and I'd say, how can you do that? How are you able to do that? And he said, sometimes they don't know better. It's not their fault, and that's okay. He looked at people, he said, I pretend I didn't see it, and I looked the other way. The only thing I would say he did not have patience for, or he did not really accept, was that people were not makir tov. He was such a makir tov for every single thing that was something that he really did not appreciate in people. So I'd like to take a minute just to be, on our family's behalf, be makir tov to many people. And I know I will miss people because there were so many people that were involved in helping my father over the years, and particularly in the last number of years, in the last number of months, that I'll probably miss people, but you should know that every kindness and every small thing that was done, he did notice it, and we noticed it, and it was appreciated. First, the Rav Shlita, the first, he was the Rav, where my father davened here for decades. My father would listen to every single word, whatever they first said, that's the first he said it. And my father didn't listen to people just because they had a kapat and a long beard. You had to actually earn that respect. And I remember one Yom Kippur when they decided consultation with Dr. Greenblatt and Rabbi first that my father couldn't eat that. So he first said, tell your father this is what, and I asked him, and if I need to, probably not going to want to listen. If I need to come tell him myself, I'll tell him myself. So I told my father what Rabbi first paskin, and I said, should Rabbi first come tell you himself? He said, Rabbi first said, what do I need to? He took the psak, not that I'm going to eat it, it's terrible. This is the psak, but first said so, and I was surprised. So I have to eat. And he said the first was like a Rav should be, the ultimate compliment. A Rav should be like an alcohol. That's the ultimate compliment, and he did not give many compliments. As a matter of fact, my father gave us no compliments because what you did was expected, kach netzarta, and you probably could have done it better. So don't expect a compliment. The entire Good Shul took care of him, watched him, especially as he got older. I remember when he hurt his leg, the Dr. Yomishir came to his house so he could attend because he would come every night. Rabbi Eichenstein, like express our curse when he started to go to Rabbi Eichenstein, how Rabbi Eichenstein took him in, Rabbi Eichenstein came again to visit him, and whatever was needed, and the shul there, how everybody, and again, that shul took him in as their Zavi, and that was tremendously appreciated. Still want to mention, the caretakers, Jeannie, who was taking care of my father for 6 years now, and Beth, who for the last year or so, they were able with them to maintain his dignity, and the end it got more difficult, and particularly, they would, Shabbos is coming, they would dress my father for Shabbos. Even to the very end, he was in a button-down shirt. They helped, they said Shabbos, they wanted to make sure the family coming, when Shabbos, when's Yontif, and that helped my father in the last years to maintain the dignity and that as it got more difficult. Dr. Greenblatt, of course, I could go on and on and on. Sukkahs from his sukkah to my father. I'm in the emergency room, and the doctor, I said, what do you do? Well, Dr. Greenblatt just emailed us at 4 o'clock in the morning what he thinks we should do. He's been up since the whole night waiting for the results to come back, Sukkah's night, so we can tell him in the emergency, and on and on and on and on and on. This week at 10 o'clock at night, then in the morning at 8:30, and on and on and on. And that really was, it would be difficult to imagine how we would have gotten as far as we've gotten without Dr. Greenblatt. And Hatzalah, all the guys, it didn't matter. The Hatzalah call came in, there was 8 guys there immediately. My father would ask him, where are all these guys? They said, Hatzalah, okay, who's that Hatzalah? Who's that Hatzalah? All of them? Yes, they all come. And it's really matzliach, whatever was needed even the last few days, there was no question. These are things that we were able to keep my father at home, and I don't know that we could have done it without the combined help of all the people. Kids in the neighborhood. He just loved the kids in the neighborhood. I remember one time when I got a call, my father is bleeding in the street. A kid ran him over accidentally and bleeding, and he thought it was the funniest thing. It was great because the kids, he loved seeing the kids, because remember, he saw 1 million kids killed. So for him to see a street of kids, was for him very chias. He would say, oh, the Newberger kids would come over Shabbos, only after they were dressed in their Shabbos clothes to get candy. And he just loved it. And it gave him chias. As he got older and he wasn't working anymore, he became, to his amusement, he became the Zaidi of the block. He was kind of amused that people would ask him for brachas. But all these things in the last number of years helped him and gave him chias. And to my brother and his wife, and taking care of my father was never on. Should I do it? Should you do it? Who can't do it? It was always, it gets done. There was no, it's my turn, it's your turn, it's everybody's turn. And everything that was needed for my father was done. Friday, Rabbi Shmuel Schmelzer would call every single Friday afternoon. The grandchildren, and they'd call, all the grandchildren would call, and they'd count the grandchildren that were local, the Burgers, the Schwarberger would take care of everything, make sure everything was done in the house. And all the grandchildren, the bar would call it the local grandchildren. There was never anything that wasn't. Do you need something, Daidi? It's our pleasure. We will do it. When can we do it? How can we do it? And my daughter, Lisa, would spend an hour to an hour and a half with them every single day. So this was, to him, gave him the chiyus at the end, and this was his relationship that he built. And this relationship is why he was proud of his children and his grandchildren, that he saw that they were carrying on the Messiah. Particularly his two local chavrusas. He learned Mesechtas after Mesechtas with Yosef Kaplan and Yehuda Kaplan. His great-grandchildren. He said to me many times that one of them said, Zay, you learn Torah with me. He said, what else do I need to live for? That's why I survived. And my wife, of course, who took care of him as she took care of her own father. No matter what was going on, my father came first, Zaidi came first. Caretaker said she had never seen a daughter-in-law take care of a father-in-law with such devotion. And truly in the end, when everyone thought it was imminent, it's Betira, my wife couldn't get back from Eretz Yisrael where she was until yesterday afternoon. He waited. And none of the nurses who came thought that was possible. And yet, he did. I'd like to conclude that while we're sad for what we've lost, the Kehillah is lost, Klal Yisrael is lost, what our family is lost, my father, we also want to express Hakaras Hatov for my father's 97 truly fruitful years of building us and showing us how a Yid should always be optimistic, look ahead, and just continue to build.
No flood Paris Rishenu, Zaidi. We all knew this day would come, but didn't think so. Because if there was anyone that could beat the Malchana Zaidi, it was you. It's impossible for me to be maspid Zaidi. I was speaking to Shua, my brother, this morning, and he says, Ariel, it's so easy to be maspid Zaidi. I said, that's why it's so hard. That's why it's so hard. Zaidi, as you were so lovingly called, not just by us, but by everyone in the neighborhood. I'll get constant calls. How's Zaidi doing? People meet me, how's Zaidi doing? What's Zaidi? And we all knew what we're talking about. We're talking about Zaidi. You were just our Zaidi. You were everyone's Zaidi. As my father mentioned, the last couple of years, people call me, can I go to your grandfather to get a bracha, can I receive a bracha? And I said, sure, knock yourself out. And my grandfather always say, like, he was loving that everybody come to visit him, and he always asked me what, I know I would give your opinion, but he was always there to give brachas to everybody. And he always made sure, he always asked me, Ariel, is the cabinet stocked with candies? When the kids come from the neighborhood, I want to make sure that everybody gets their candy. He was not just my Zaidi, he was all of our Zaidi. Zaidi, you were our Zaidi. As the Sforno says, in this week's Parsha, the Psukim go through the kids of Reuben, Shimon, Levi. By Levi, it goes on to expound Gershon, Kassim, Rory, and it goes on to explain. Yocheved, Amram goes on to the next generation. The Sforno explains why Dafka by Levi did it go and go to the third generation, and he explains is because the hashpah of Levi carried through into the next generation, continues carrying through. Zaidi, how appropriate the hashpah that you had just carries through, not just to us as grandchildren, but to all of us that came in your presence. You were larger than life. Just this, I got a lot of calls this morning, a lot of text messages. I happened to answer one of the calls, and the person says, Ariel, I know you're busy, I just wanted to tell you one thing. Anytime I felt down or I was feeling a little like I needed a pick-me-up, I would call visit your grandfather. Every single time I walked out, I automatically felt better. Last week, I was in Chodrov. Someone comes over to me, he's like, who's Tessler? So I said, I'm Tessler. There's Einkel Penatuli. I think that was something that all of us grandchildren got used to hearing. There's Einkel Penatuli, or a grandson of Rudy, and the person would go and for 3-5 minutes just give us some sort of hesped time of what the impact Zaidi had on him. Zaidi, every time I visited you, whether it was a week or it was a day that I hadn't seen you, you always asked the same question. Ariel, what did you accomplish? You didn't ask me, what did you do, or what am I up to? You always said, what did you accomplish? Because Zaidi, that's who you were. You were somebody that accomplished. Coming from the Churban Europe, you had all the excuses, all the possible excuses. No one would have faulted you for these excuses. But you picked yourself up, you didn't make excuses. And by sheer will, by sheer determination, you rebuilt piece by piece with Bobby a beautiful Tardige Mishpacha, Einaklach, Ir Einaklach, Ir Einaklach, all Shomer, Torah, Mitzvahs, Unilite, Choshem Mishpachas. You created that by just your determination, Zaidi, because you were accomplishing. Zaidi, you didn't rebuild Chicago, you built Chicago. Almost every mice in Chicago has your fingertips, has your fingerprints all over them. You were on a mission to rebuild Torah after the war, whether in America, whether in Israel. There were times that I walked into Moses in Israel and I would see your name on the wall, whether it was from the great synagogue to Vishnitz and anything in between. Because Zaidi, you were on a mission, you were rebuilding Klal Yisrael, whatever it took, you were going to rebuild it. You were constantly reminding us, looking back to our Messiah, how each and every grandchild knew we were Aniklot for the Chassam Sefer from Bobby's side. The stories you used to tell us about the Vishvaru, the Sheis Menachem, what it was like learning in Sekalit, the Shabbos Agol Drushes, what it was like before the war, when my kids used to visit you, or used to come spend the Friday nights with us by my house, my children. We just loved listening to the stories and listening to what it was like. And you loved explaining to us what it was like. But Zaidi, as much as you look back and you connected us to our Messiah, you were always looking forward. You were a visionary, a true visionary in every sense of the word. Zaidi, I had the schluss of spending a lot of time with you. whether in Chicago, in Eretz Yisrael, going Yom Kippur to the Vishnitz was a special experience. We used to go on long walks, we used to go to the Kaisel. I could never keep up with you, Zaidi. You're always on these walks and these shmooze and the time spent with you, you're always pushing me. Never letting me settle. And one thing you always asked, or should I say demanded of us, are you taking care of your wife? Are you taking care of your children? You loved every one of us. We knew it, we felt it. As much as you pushed us, we knew you loved us. The grandchildren knew you loved us. I went into my children's room this morning, I told them the news. It was a moment for them, they were zeicher to have an Alta Zayda and to be in your presence. It was zeicher to learn from you. You were just so full of life, and it's lessons like those and everything that you gave to us that will propel us further. Zaidi, we're going to miss you. We're going to miss the stories. We're going to miss the students. We're going to miss your just personality. You never held back. We always loved it. It was always just pure chiyas. The lessons you imbued upon us of achrayus and just to accomplish. I do want to take this moment, and as a child, I got a real, true lesson in kibbutz av, watching my father, watching my mother, watching my uncle and my aunt, really spending time with Zaidi, taking care of him. As my father said, it was never who, me, you. It was always who had opportunity to take care of Zaidi. Zaidi, Klal Yisrael is going through a shver matzav right now. We ask you, go, Kisei HaKavod, go be a Me'eretz Yasher, for us, for the family, for Chicago, for Klal Yisrael. Mocha Shedim Akapanim, Yizrachem Baruch.
I'll try to keep this quick. We are here to pay tribute to a great man, a man who has seemingly been everywhere and done everything. Without exception, Zaidi has touched the lives of every single person in this room. Like my cousin said, Zaidi had cheated the Malach HaMavet so many times and for so long that it was easy to think of him as invincible. But now, he is no longer with us, and we are diminished. He was a link to the past, a walking bridge of the Emunah Pshuta of yesteryear to the cold, ruthless practicalities of the 21st century. Perhaps because he was astride these two worlds, he was a sort of walking contradiction. He suffered no fools, yet somehow was beloved by all. Therein lies one of Zaidi's paths to greatness, and believe me, there were several. As Pirkei Avos states, who is wise, he who learns from every person. Zaidi's true humility allowed him to connect and learn from all of humanity, as evidenced by his long and varied careers, which we have heard about today. Everything from chicken farmer to real estate magnate to organizer of everything from cigarettes to gold. He did it all. It's clear to all that Zaidi was a great man, but great men don't always make great fathers or grandfathers. That's what I'm here for. I can say wholeheartedly, unequivocally, and without reservation that he was a great grandfather. He was a great man for escaping a hellscape with his self-sanity and morality intact. And he was a great grandfather for his wit, humor, and the twinkle in his eye that clued you in on the fact that he was joking. He was a great man for his efforts to bring Holocaust awareness and education to the masses. And he was a great grandfather for taking us with him to see where he and Bobby came from, an invitation to step into the past with him despite the pain that it surely caused. He was a great man for his foundational support of so much that we take for granted nowadays. He was a great grandfather for the adventures he took us on and the memories that he gave us. I recall one time several months ago I asked him if he had to condense everything that he knew into one piece of advice. What would that be? He said, Kadima, always move forward. To those who knew him, this word encompassed so much about what he was. He was always moving forward, always fighting, and he and Bobby were able to instill this into the family as well. It's hard to reduce Zaidi to one or even several elements, but it's clear that his indomitable will, tempered with true humility, impelled him ever forward under the guidance of his Emunah Pshuta. I can only imagine what a fearsome and wondrous couple my grandparents would have made in their heyday. They have given us everything, and now they are together again. Thank you for everything, Zaidi. We love you, and goodbye.
El Malay Rachamim, Sheikhem Bam Roimim, Am Tzei Menucha Nechoina, B'Tzel Kanfei Ashchina, Ma'alois Kedoshim U'Toirim Kezayar Harakia, Ma'zehirim Es Nishmas, Rav Naftali Ben Rav Shlomo Shalach Li'olamai, Ba'avur, Shmishpachti Den Tztov Al-Skor Nishmasai, Began Eden Tehei Menuchasai, Lochein Ba'alo Rachamim, Yastireu B'Seisar K'nafav Li'olamim, B'Yitzroi B'Tzorachim Es Nishmasai Alenoi Unachlosai, V'yonuach B'Shalom, Al Nishkovoi V'Noimar Amen.
This concludes Levi here. The crew will be tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock, at the Vision Tzivah Zechayim in Bnei Brak. It's all going to depend on what time the flight lands, and it's Israel approximately 2 hours after the plane lands. For those who are joining us, we're going to the airport now. We'll be lining up in St. Louis going south. We ask if you're going to the airport to please go immediately to the vehicles. The roads are getting a little treacherous, so if we could just go to our vehicles and we'll get to the airport in a safe manner. Please just create an aisleway so the family can leave. Huh? We're not sure yet. It all depends on when we take off. You know, I mean, After you.